presenting to everyone, so hopefully it just shows me and no one else pops up while I'm doing my little intro presentation. Thanks everyone for joining us, both to our speakers and to the public hopefully watching at home. I'm going to pull up a brief introductory slideshow right now and talk a little bit about what we're going to cover today. So we're talking about orcas of the Pacific Northwest, and this is to celebrate Orca Month. June is Orca Month this year in British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon. And we're holding this webinar for everybody who can't come to events in the area, but can still have the opportunity to learn about orcas from wherever you're tuning in from. So we're going to be focusing on the 3 ecotypes of killer whales, or Orcinus orca. We will use both names, both killer whales and orca, kind of interchangeably in the eastern North Pacific. And we are also going to mention Pacific Northwest and eastern North Pacific because although we live in the Pacific Northwest here on the west coast, the orcas live in the water, so they actually live in the eastern part of the North Pacific Ocean. So while we can see them off of our coast in the Pacific Northwest, they're looking at us from the eastern North Pacific. And another important definition to keep in mind is what exactly an ecotype is. So when we say ecotype, we're talking about a different form or variety of a single species. So worldwide, orcas are considered one species, but there are recognized different forms of killer whales that are different, genetically distinct. So they're kind of all different from each other. And here in the Pacific Northwest, we see residents, which are fish-eating orcas, transients, also known as Bigg's orcas, named after Michael Bigg, who was one of the first researchers who really studied orcas here in the Northwest. And we also see offshores. And worldwide, there are 10 recognized ecotypes, although there are most likely more. And these are the 3 that we're going to go into with a little more detail today with the help of our panel of experts that I will introduce right now. We're going to start off with Paul Spong and Helena Simons from Orca Lab. They've been studying killer whales up in British Columbia at their land-based research station for 46 years now, since 1970. We have Juliana Houghton, a recent graduate from the University of Washington Fisheries Department, where she studied killer whales, and she's currently a fisheries biologist with the Army Corps of Engineers. We have Jared Towers with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Canada, and we have Giles joining us hopefully soon from the Center for Whale Research. Of course, there's always technical difficulties, and we're trying to get her in now, so hopefully we'll see her soon. Oh, there she is. But we won't put the pressure on her to start us off since she did just join. We are now going to switch over to Paul and Helena from Orca Lab, who are going to talk to us about the northern residents.
Thanks, Colleen.
Hi there.
Hello, everyone. Would you like to start? Or maybe now that you've had a little glimpse of us, we'll put on a slide that, oops, wait a minute. There's this little technical thing we have to do here. It's okay. All right, can everyone see the whales?
Well, I can.
Can you, Colleen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Okay. Anyway, we've been studying the northern resident whales, as Colleen said, for a fairly long time. We live in what has become known as their core, one of their core habitats in the Johnson Strait, Blackfish Sound area. Our research facility, Orca Lab, is actually on Blackney Pass, which joins those 2 other waterways, and typically during the summer and fall, the northern residents will come into this area and transit the area and use the area during the day and the night.
Indeed. Yeah, we're actually very fortunate being here. The area of this is almost, if you can visualize it, almost to the northern part of Vancouver Island. We're in a sense in the southern part of the range of the northern residents. Can you put the map on?
Yeah, I'll see if it works.
Which is essentially, if you can visualize Vancouver Island and the coast of the Pacific Northwest. There we go. This is a map produced by the DFO, Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Canada, which essentially shows the range of the northern resident community. I can't point at it, but it's the upper part of this graphic. Essentially, the territory that they occupy, it ranges from about halfway down Vancouver Island all the way up into southeast Alaska. So it's huge, and it's very, very complicated in terms of the ocean and the islands and the waterways and the channels and so forth that the whales move through. They are active year-round in this area, although we're set up here really mostly in the summertime and fall, which coincides with the salmon runs. And orcas being fish-eating animals, and the primary prey being Chinook salmon or spring salmon or king salmon in the United States, with chum salmon being a second favorite, especially in the fall season. These are big, fatty fish, and I guess that explains why the orcas prefer them. In any event, they have a very large range, and we happen to be fortunately situated in a part of their range where they habitually come back to the area year after year after year. Do you want to put on the slide that shows the...
Sure. Well, first of all, we'll get back to the core habitat and what it looks like. But for the northern residents, their society is complex and quite interesting and intricate. We know from the work that people like Jared Towers has done that there are now approximately 290 individuals, and they're organized into groups called matrilines, which consists of the mother and her offspring. And as of now, I think there are about 43 matrilines that are organized into 16 pods. Now, these are the matrilines are all the ones that are the most closely related and seen traveling the most together have been associated into a pod, but it's a term that is losing some of its impact because it's recognized that the core social unit really is the matriline, and all the heritage, acoustic heritage, travels through the mother into her offspring, so the generations are continuous. Yeah. In the northern resident community, we're fortunate in having 3 large acoustic traditions, and these are, how would you best describe a clan, Paul?
Well, a clan really is a group of families that shares some calls. Not necessarily all of them, but shares enough calls to identify it as being separate from the others. So, for example, in the A clan, you have many families which share some calls, so some families are quite distinct from one another. But there's no overlap between the calls that they use and the calls of the 2 other clans, one of them being called the G clan, and the third one being called the R clan. And it's one of the things for me that's most interesting about this is that even though there is a great acoustic separation between these different family groups, they all know each other well. They're all part of the same community. And they come together and they mingle with one another. They mate with one another. They share their lives together, and so they, in a way, it's a great mystery, I think, how they managed to retain this separation in their acoustic traditions and at the same time managed to carry on their traditions as a community together.
They really are one community, and as Paul said earlier, their range is quite extensive. But we're fortunate in this area to see quite a few of these families come back each year. And as Paul said, even though they seemingly do not share, some of these groups do not share calls, they do intermingle and socialize with each other through the can see anywhere from just a few individuals to, I think the most we have seen
160.
160 at one time in Blackney, which was a little crowded, but it was a lot of fun. So we thought we'd throw this slide up to just tell you once again that in this community, the Northern Resident community, there are these three strong acoustic traditions, A, G, and R. And we're going to just play for you now. And even to the untrained ear, you'll be able to hear the difference for the G clan calls. And sometimes we're even fortunate to have the R clan whales come down, and they sound something like this. And when they all come together, and they're very vocal, and when they're getting together sometimes for the first time, usually it's quite an exciting event. And one year we were fortunate to have a beautiful, calm evening, and it was a full moon, and there was even northern lights, and over 80 whales, probably about 100, came through Blackney Pass, and they sounded something like this. So we did talk to you a little bit, or hinted at, that the area that we live in has become known as core habitat, and that's because of the high, over the years, the high incidence of whales in the area.
Yeah, it's interesting. The whales, the orcas, have a peak season. It sort of, as I mentioned, follows the season of the salmon migrations. But they do have a habit, some of them, particularly one of the family groups, the A5 pod, has a habit of coming in also in the winter time and making their way all the way through here, which you can see in the Johnson Strait and down into Georgia Strait. But their presence in the wintertime is fairly unpredictable, apart from the A5s, and they probably have favorite hangouts. Places on the coast, I would think, that are also reflective of the traditions. All of them know the coast incredibly well. This is one of the most amazing things about these guys. They have such an incredible understanding of the geography. As far as I can tell, they seldom or never make mistakes about where they are. They know where they are. They know where they're going. and they keep returning to their favorite spots. And there are probably lots of them up and down the coast. This area has been recognized as critical habitat for the northern residents because of the long history, I think, of people observing them. But I'm quite sure there are other places on the coast where there's such a routine presence of the whales that they deserve to be acknowledged as critical habitat as well.
And not everything is rosy. Over the last several years, the numbers of different families coming into this area has declined. And a lot of that is to do with the parallel decline in their favorite prey. And these are fish specialists, and they like Chinook salmon. In the United States, these are called kings of the 5 species of salmon. And the whales are really following these whales into these areas and taking advantage of their travel into and to their rivers. And in the fall, also critical for the orcas is the chum salmon, and both of these species have suffered quite significantly over the years, and it's a very big concern for everyone.
Just to tell you a little bit about our work, we are a land-based operation. We primarily listen using a network of hydrophones, which are placed in key spots in the surrounding area. We listen to about 50 square kilometers of the surrounding area, which is a good chunk of the critical habitat, but by no means all of it. But what the network does for us is pretty much allows us to determine when orcas are coming into the area, and from the acoustics we can pretty much often regularly tell who it is, which particular family groups are there. And we listen day and night, and we listen year-round, so we gain a pretty good understanding of what is happening with the whales just from acoustics. You want to do the next slide?
I will, and just to say that on this map it shows typically the kind of routes that the whales take. They come, typically when they're arriving, come in from the northwest, and then they will make choices about which route they'll take. But their destination seems to be Johnson Strait, and one of the features of the Johnson Strait that probably draws the orcas to it is the presence of the rubbing beaches. And I think we have...
Yeah, these are little beaches that have smooth pebbles in that the whales seem to enjoy rubbing their bodies in. In a sense, they seem kind of like orca massage parlors, but we think there are various theories about why they come and enjoy these beaches, but we think a lot of it has to do with just the sheer fun that they have coming in and rubbing. And often it's the case that there are many different groups that use these beaches. It seems in a way to be a destination when the whales come into the area, and I think it's just in a way just a lot of fun for them. Anyway, I think we've just about used up our time here, and we're obviously happy to answer questions, but perhaps we'll just turn it over to the moderator here.
Thank you. Those are beautiful maps and really great information about the northern residents. And I think we're ready to have Giles come up now and talk about the southern residents, who are same ecotype but different population and different community.
I'm here.
All right.
So what I'm, sorry, just kind of a techno novice here. There we go. Sorry, just bringing it up.
Okay. And we are getting some questions coming in, so just to remind everybody watching that if you scroll down on the web page, there is a Google form where you can submit questions, and those come through to me and Missy, and we'll be collecting them, and then at the end, after all the presentations, we'll go over the questions and give them to our panel of experts.
Okay, so I think it should be coming up. Can everybody see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I am fortunate to be able to study the Southern residents. I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Deborah Giles. I go by Giles. I've been the research director at the Center for Well Research since late last year, and I've been studying the Southern residents since 2005. This picture here on my first slide is a picture of J27, and just one of our largest and oldest males, which is pretty phenomenal because it actually is something that I'll talk about in a little bit. He's, as I said, one of the older males that we have, and he's just quite young, actually, born in '91. So our populations are here for the Southern residents are quite a bit different than the Northern resident killer whales. There are just 83 of them. Well, sorry, a little out of order here. This picture here shows a map of our core area where we do the bulk of our research, although we are permitted to do research on the Southern residents wherever they are found. This is in the green box in the middle. That's where we tend to spend most of our time. I've been working under a couple of different permits since I started doing research on these guys, and now mostly just under the Center for Well Research's research permit. The Southern residents were listed in Canada first, actually, under the Species at Risk Act in 2003, and then it took another 2 years, and the whales were finally listed on November 18th, 2005 in the U.S. And the Endangered Species Act has in the U.S. has a nice provision where a distinct population segment of a genus species can be listed as endangered or threatened, even though the overall genus species, so in this case Orcinus orca, worldwide are not considered at risk or threatened. This small population was determined by genetics to be a distinct population. There's no outbreeding. They breed entirely within the Southern resident community. So just a single clan here, made up of J's, K's, and L's, and I'll get to that in a little bit. The reason that they were identified as a species, a small population that could be given that dubious distinction of being on the endangered species list. It's good on the one hand because it provides a bit of protection for them, but very bad because obviously that means that the population is not doing well. So the main identified threats at their listing in 2005 were prey declines, both in quality and quantity, and as Paul and Helena indicated, these guys are also fish specialists, and very much focused on Chinook salmon, the historically the largest and fattiest of the Chinook species. Also pollution and the potential for oil spills were also listed as identified threats. Pollution being your PCBs, so an industrial lubricant those have been banned, thankfully. PBDEs, which are flame retardants, which are in different states, also thankfully starting to be phased out, although still used quite heavily in other parts of the country and along the coast. And then DDT, which was an agricultural chemical that was also banned more than 40 years ago, although banned in the U.S., it's still used in Mexico and other countries, sadly. DDT has an incredibly long half-life, and that chemical is still leaching out of groundwater, mainly in California where it was used the most, and that shows up most predominantly in our L-pod animals, which go down there more into the Central Valley, Monterey Bay area than any of the other two pods. K-pod also has pretty high levels of DDT. Because that, and it makes sense actually, we know now that K-pod goes at least down to Point Reyes area. J-pod has DDT also, but not nearly the levels that the other two groups do. So those are the main chemicals that people are studying, and the main chemicals that were identified as being of threat to these animals. And then vessel effects, both the presence, physical presence, and the noise that vessels generate in the habitat around the whales. Julianne is going to talk about that one a little bit more, so I'll skip over any details there. So the killer whales in general, probably most people know this. I just thought it was a good idea to go over it a little bit, and how these whales were able to be listed on the endangered species list, even though worldwide there are a number of killer whales that are not. So diet is a very, very distinct thing that's easy to see what the animals are eating, and it's obvious when you're looking at a transient that they're not foraging on fish. They tend to be pretty gregarious feeders, throwing their food, and fish-eating killer whales it's a lot more subtle what you're looking for in behaviors. So the social groupings, this is fascinating actually. In the past we would have said that you could tell from a distance which ecotype of killer whale you were looking at based on the number of animals that were in the group, because in the past the mammal-eating killer whales are what we're starting to call Biggs killer whales, after Mike Bigg, kind of the father of studying these, grandfather of studying these animals. He was the first to be able to photo-identify individuals. So we're starting to, as a tribute to him, call the mammal-eating whales Biggs killer whales. In the past, Biggs would have been in very small groups, 3 to 5 individuals, whereas the residents could be in groups of 6 to 10 to all the way up to the entire population, so 80 plus animals. That's not the case so much anymore, and I bet Jared is going to touch on that with regard to how the populations of transients are changing in this region. And sadly, because there's not enough food in this region, our historically very familial and tight-knit group of southern resident fish-eating killer whales, who used to be in large groups, are now mostly seen in very small portions of pods, or even just families, matrilines. So that's pretty disturbing at this point. And again, we think that is because the whales are having to split up more in order to find fewer fish, in order to at least maintain a high enough fat content that they're not dying. So genetics over the years have gotten better and better. There's a brand new paper out by Andrew Foote and colleagues that discusses this a little bit more, but genetics definitely played a role in these animals being able to be listed as a distinct population segment under the Endangered Species Act, showing these animals, the fish eaters, hadn't bred with the mammal eaters that occupy the same water, sometimes even at the same time, for several hundreds of thousands of years. So that's been pretty fascinating to see that genetics work develop over time. Morphologically, they look different, so even a fairly untrained eye can tell the difference between a fish eater and a mammal eater. The shape of the dorsal fin is different. The eye patch tends to be very different. The whole head is more robust in a mammal eater, as one would expect, given their prey fight back pretty heartily. They've got differences in their teeth that you wouldn't be able to see from a distance for sure. But so again, morphology, and then as Paul and Helena mentioned, their dialects are very different. So within the southern residents, there's distinct calls within each of the 3 pods, and we're also starting to recognize that there are within even families using distinct calls, and so 2 families together will utilize calls. It's looking like where they won't use that call if that one of those families is with a different family. So really interesting work that we're starting to get into more specifically. And then culture here I have listed, and I just wanted to show a couple of examples of that. So, diet specializations around the world. The ones up in the top right-hand corner, those tend to be the ones that people see most on National Geographic type shows, with the partial beaching in Argentina. Fairly dangerous hunting strategy, but those animals down there have really adapted to being incredibly successful with that foraging strategy. And then we have down here in the bottom right our local southern residents eating a king salmon there. So southern residents, we now are down to just 83 animals, which is pretty horrifying from a genetics standpoint. 29 J-pod animals, 19 K-pod animals, and just 35 L-pod animals. Again, as mentioned with the northern residents, these guys are in very tight family groups that stay, males and females stay with their mother their entire life, which is pretty unique in the animal world. I guess humans would be the closest to that. So with regard to culture, these guys are known to do this behavior called kelping, where they seemingly purposely put themselves oftentimes right in the middle of kelp beds and roll around, and you can see the animal up in the top left-hand corner. That's a female, and she's got kelp draped over her belly, and she swam like that upside down for about 4 minutes. During this pass by the Lighthouse Limekiln State Park. And then another really interesting cultural thing that the southern residents do is they do this thing called a greeting ceremony, where members of J-pod or K-pod or L-pod coming into the area for the first time in a long time will line up. So you'll have Jays, for example, who may have been here for a week or more, line up peck to peck in a nice line. You can barely see it in the screen in the middle. That was a line of Jays closest to the camera, and then there's a glassy area between, and then you can see a line of dorsal fins facing Jays. Those were K-pod animals coming into the area. They hadn't seen each other that we know of for quite some time, and they line up like that and do kind of a stare off. There's no movement, there's no vocalizations, no surface active behaviors. It's just kind of a way, we think, to check each other out and see who's present, maybe who's new and who's lost, and then there's some sort of so far by humans anyway, undetectable cue that the whales receive, and then the whole pod, or the two groups of the two pods that are greeting each other, will come together in, we call them whale balls, where they're just rolling over on each other and breaching, and a lot of tactile social behavior. So that's a pretty phenomenal thing to be able to witness. Again, we're not seeing this nearly as much as we used to, because the animals are not congregating in this area like they used to, which is quite sad. So I just wanted to throw a couple of photos of the 4 main behaviors that we end up seeing here. We have a group of fast-traveling whales. They're very tight together here, and we see quite a lot of this. We don't see enough foraging. This is an example of a southern resident with a Chinook salmon in his mouth. We wish we saw more of this. Socializing also has decreased. Wow, I'm sorry, that image was very sharp when I viewed my PowerPoint before. So this is an example of a whale ball of a couple of calves that were roughhousing, and so unfortunately we're not seeing as much social behavior as we used to. Resting actually is a behavior that we're hardly seeing anymore in daylight time. So Dawn Noren just had a paper come out about this, which corroborated findings from my master's and PhD research, which showed over time, since these animals have been studied, some of the original researchers had documented these animals resting as much as 25 to 27% of the time during daylight hours. And then about 12 years later, another researcher published his dissertation and found that the whales were only resting 13% of the time during daylight hours. And then when I took my data between 2006 and 2009, the whales were down to only foraging during, resting only 6.9% of the time during daylight hours. And so that's a pretty interesting shift in the behavioral budget of these animals down here. Just an example of, this is another lovely example of the whales that were resting that we were with towards the end of a day one time. Pardon me, sorry. So lastly, my last two slides, I just wanted to focus in, kind of hone in on one of the things that are really impacting these animals is coast-wide abundance of Chinook salmon. So as mentioned before, the animals are obligate fish eaters and very highly adapted to finding the largest, formerly largest and fattiest of the salmon species, the king salmon or Chinook salmon. This graph here shows how tightly correlated or how tightly bound killer whale deaths in the southern resident community are with changes in fish abundance, coast-wide fish abundance. So the colorful graph at the bottom is showing you pardon me, I'm being distracted by the phone, rivers from southeast Alaska all the way down to the Central Valley of California, and each one of those lines represents a different population of Chinook. And you can see the dips in, for example, in 2008 when we had incredibly low overall coast-wide abundance of Chinook salmon, and you look up to the top where the purple bar charts are, or bar graph is, you can see how that's depicting the deaths of the southern resident community. So this picture here really to us tells essentially the whole story. If the whales had enough food to eat, they wouldn't be metabolizing their blubber, and then they wouldn't be releasing all of those toxins that are stored in their blubber, and it's kind of a vicious cycle with regard to the animals being stressed out by noise, increasing noise in their environment, not having enough food to eat, metabolizing their blubber, and having those toxins surge through their system. So again, we really feel like this picture tells the whole story. I guess I'll leave you with that. So I get the Center for Whale Research is very, very highly focused on trying to continue to take information on the southern residents, continue to monitor their population, and also really focusing on encouraging our federal government to make decisions, wise decisions with regard to fisheries management. So I think I'll end there, and I think we're going to take questions at the end. Is that correct?
It is, but this is a good reminder to everybody who's watching to please submit questions if you have them. There is a Google form document on the webpage. Even if you're watching through YouTube, I guess we've had some technical issues, as always happens. But if you go to the webpage, whales.org/Orca Awareness Month, you can submit questions, and we'll go through all those at the end. And Juliana is up next. And if you're ready to go, we are ready to watch.
Yes, hi everybody. Great, let me pull up my slides. So I'm going to actually talk about two different studies that I was able to publish last year with many collaborators, and Giles was actually one of them. In addition, we had researchers from NOAA Fisheries and Cascadia Research Collective and Killer Whale Tales also contributing to this work. So first, I'm going to talk about southern resident killer whales and the effects of vessels, which Giles mentioned is one of the risk factors to their recovery. Our local waters provide a really awesome opportunity to view these whales in their environment. There's not very many opportunities to see an awesome top predator like whales in other parts of the world. So this is a great opportunity for people to get out there. A lot of times they learn about conservation measures that they can, conservation actions they can do at home to help the whales as well. So whale watching is great, but there are also documented negative impacts to the whales. Based on vessel presence, it seems that the southern residents decrease the amount of time spent foraging when there are more boats around. So that's particularly concerning when they are a prey-limited population. And, you know, as Giles mentioned extensively, they need to probably focus more time on foraging, but more boats means they spend less time doing so. Also, when there are more boats around, they increase their swim speed and dive duration. Those could possibly be avoidance behaviors, although that's speculation. And they also increase their surface active behavior, so the amount of time they spend doing breaching and tail slapping and those sorts of behaviors. That's concerning because those types of behavior cost more energy. So for a population that is prey limited and needs to utilize and keep all of their fat stores, to spend more energy is a problem. There's also been studies looking particularly at the noise that vessels create. In one study, I'll actually get to that study in particular in a moment, but whales in our local waters, it's important to consider the noise, and we know that they live in this pretty noisy environment, and it's not just man-made noise, but also natural noises. But besides just whale watching boats, there's construction noise, there's a lot of shipping. This is a really high shipping area. We have ferries that take people from different parts of the Sound and between, you know, the U.S. and Canada as well. So these whales are very frequently having to deal with lots of noise in their environment. In terms of the previous research on vessel noise, there was one study that counted the number of boats at the surface and recorded the noise that related to in the environment as measured by a stationary hydrophone. And it found that when there were more boats in the area, there was more noise in the environment for the whales. This was a paper called Speaking Up by Marla Holt. And she also found that when there was more noise in the environment, the whales actually had to speak up. They had to call louder to make themselves heard over the extra environmental noise. So sometimes you might do the same thing if you're at a crowded cocktail party. You have to try to talk to somebody right next to you, but you find yourself losing a couple words here or there. That's because of acoustic masking. Or you might speak up to talk over the chatter. So the whales actually have to do that. However, in this study, there were some limitations. We know that whales don't just stick around a stationary hydrophone. They're moving and diving in their environment. And we also know that boats are not just static. There are different characteristics about the boats. There's vessel speed, there's their size, there's how many vessels there are, there's how close they are to the whale. So for my master's research at the UW, I wanted to look at what is it about the boats that makes it noisy for whales and for the noise that the whales actually receive. To do that, we attached suction cup tags to the whales. Oh, I also wanted to mention that all of the photos here were taken by scientists at the NOAA Northwest Fisheries Science Center with a research permit. So this is a picture of a D-tag, a digital acoustic recording tag on a whale, and you can see that it's sucked on there with 4 suction cups, and it actually has 2 hydrophones on it to record the noise that the whale's actually receiving. And so we can compare that noise then to the vessel traffic to figure out what's making it noisy for the whales. This is how we get the tag on the whales. Lots of people are always wondering how we do that. We have to gradually approach the whale slowly and gradually match its speed and direction. And then here's Jeff Hogan with the tag on the end of a pole, and we just stick it on there, and then we follow the whale for the day to collect data on its activities, where it is in relation to the vessels around it. And the vessel data collection is made much more accurate with another innovative technology that we use. Deborah Giles, or you guys know Deborah Giles. You guys know Giles. Giles developed this mobile remote sensing survey equipment package, or a laser positioning system. It's this equipment that was taken from the road survey industry and made mobile and altered for field data collection, so that we are actually able to get the position of the whale in space and time every time it comes to the surface, and then also collect all of the positions of the vessels within a kilometer around the whale. So this gets us a lot of really precise information, and then I was able to look at all the different characteristics of the vessels and how they relate to the noise that the whales are receiving. In a variety of analyses, I found that vessel speed was the most important contributor to the noise received by the whale. It was in all three of the analyses I did, and so we concluded that vessel speed is the most important for the noise received by the whale, although other factors could be important, especially when considering vessel presence, the effects of vessel presence. So for those effects, the distance of the vessel to the whale might be very important as well, and other studies show that they are. So, but for the noise that the whales experience, the louder or the faster the vessels, the louder the vessels. And this was published in PLOS One and made a few headlines. So if you want to help endangered killer whales, you can slow down your boat. And that's in addition to we actually have regulations in U.S. waters for how close you can get to the whales. You can see here this little Be Whale Wise guide here shows that you cannot approach within 200 yards of the whales or 400 yards of the whale's path. And so this approach, this regulation, allows us to hopefully minimize the impact on killer whales. There's no speed limit in this regulation, but the NOAA Protected Resources Division is considering their regulations so that they can continue making sure that all of the regulations are best to improve and help the whales recover. Now I'm going to transition to transient killer whales and their use of the Salish Sea. I think Giles mentioned that the transient name came from, in the past, these whales seem to just kind of spend a little bit of time in our local waters and go, but in recent years they seem to be in our local waters in the Pacific Northwest, we like to call the Salish Sea, a lot more often. And this hasn't really been documented too much, so another paper was published last year to show that this is indeed happening, and made some speculations as to why it might be so. So from 1987 to 1993, it seems that the transient killer whales came into the Salish Sea and the Puget Sound kind of consistently, but between 2004 and 2010 they seem to have increased the amount of times they come into this local area, and just within that time period they increased from 2004 to 2010, so they're spending more time in our local waters. And when so there's an increased time spent in the area, and they're going to different areas more often, so going down into Puget Sound and Hood Canal and the Gulf Islands. And when we're considering why this is the case, one of the reasons is likely that the total population is increasing. This is a study out of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Canada, and you can see that the population is increased, and I'm sure Jared might be talking about this, so I'll skip that. But we also know that the prey of the transient killer whales are increasing over time as well. So this is a figure showing the time or the amount of these prey populations in 2010 and then their relative abundance compared to that number in the 25 years before that. So you can see all of these marine mammal species in our local waters increased in abundance over this time. And this has a lot to do with the implementation of the Marine Mammal Protection Act in 1972. And so there's just more protections on marine mammals, and they've been doing pretty well. The harbor seals seem to be at carrying capacity, and so the transients have plenty of food to eat, and that might be why they're hanging around here more often. The transients seem to have also changed their seasonal occurrence. So in the older time period, there is this seasonal peak of the whales coming into the Salish Sea in August and September. And this correlates to the harbor seal pupping and post-weaning season. So it seems that they were kind of specializing on harbor seal pups and utilizing them as a resource. But now in the most recent time period, that peak has kind of been depressed, and they're here more often throughout the whole year. So maybe they're utilizing other prey resources. Instead of just one seasonal peak, there's two. So there still seems to be a peak in that August-September time for the post-pupping, post-weaning season for harbor seals. But in April and May, there's also another little peak, and that is the peak sea lion occurrence in our local waters. So this seems to indicate that the transients are utilizing a variety of prey resources and not just specializing on the harbor seal pups in our local waters. The whales have also changed their group size. So, and Giles mentioned this a little bit as well. So in the past, they were generally in small groups, and these small groups are great for foraging on little harbor seal pups. But in the more recent years, the average is higher, and you can see that there are even occurrences of many, many whales all together in a group. So this is a change in behavior that's likely related to the prey and their prey behavior, their foraging behavior. I always like to finish up my talks to the public with a little slide about what you can do at home, because everybody can help the whales. You don't have to be in the Puget Sound. You don't have to you don't have to go whale watching and just stay far enough away. You should do that. That's great, but you could also just limit your water use, which means turning off the water when you brush your teeth. A lot of people don't know that, but I hope that you do now. And you can wash your car in an actual car wash. Don't just wash it down the drain, because a lot of those drains go straight into our local waters. Work to clean up and restore habitat. Do your own gardening, limit your driving and pollution, save electricity, recycle. All the good conservation measures will all help to improve our habitat and an environment for the salmon, which means more fish for the whales to eat, and also just helps for water quality for the whales themselves. So there are things that you can do to help. And with that, I'll transition back and let Colleen take it from there.
All right, thanks, Juliana, and thanks for that last slide about what we can do to help. That's definitely one of the most important takeaways from Orca Month altogether, is what are things we can do to help orcas. And we are going to transition to Jared now, if he is ready to go, and reminder to everyone to submit questions if you have them.
Hi there, everybody. Can you hear me all right, Colleen?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, good. I'm just going to set up the presentation here, and just let me know if you can see it all right once it's ready to go. Does that look all right to you?
That looks great.
Okay, good. So just an introduction first. My name is Jared Towers. I work with the Biological Station, Fisheries and Oceans Canada. Primarily working with cetacean species at risk, but I spend a lot of time on the water with Biggs killer whales, and also run the photo identification program for killer whales in British Columbia. Just a short presentation here today, but backing up a little bit to 1973, before I was born, was when photo identification began. Mike Bigg, of course, and Graham Ellis started photo identifying killer whales here in British Columbia and in Washington a little bit later, and found that different groups of whales not only appeared different, but also had different behaviors. This is a look at T23 in 1982 and again in 2011, showing really not much change in her external appearance of the dorsal fin and saddle patch. So this kind of shows how useful photo identification can be for tracking animals over time and then attributing certain behaviors to certain individuals and groups of individuals, the most apparent of which was with certain types, like the bigs or transient killer whales as they were initially called, was that these animals spent more time traveling very close to shore and exploiting different prey resources than residents did. As mentioned previously by Paul and Helena and Deborah and Juliana, these animals are preying primarily on marine mammals, and stellar sea lions are on the menu, as well as Dall's porpoises, Pacific white-sided dolphins, harbor porpoises, and their favorite being harbor seals. This is just a look at from 1990 to 2011, the 416 predation events that we were able to document what the breakdown of the certain types of prey were. So you can see, at least for killer whales in and around Vancouver Island, that the transient type at least are preying primarily on harbor seals. So in total, we have a population here that's matrilineal focused, in which the basic social unit is a matriline, and this appears to be a constant for the species around the world. However, Bigg's killer whales primarily consume marine mammals, whereas residents primarily consume fish. The Bigg's or transient killer whales have limited vocal repertoires in comparison to residents and offshores and other morphotypes around the world, probably because their prey can hear them. And resident killer whales and offshores feed on fish, which don't hear as well as other marine mammals. So they've developed these very social complex structures. Just like resident killer whales, Bigg's killer whales have several genetically distinct populations occurring in different regions of the North Pacific Ocean. And this type of killer whale is the most divergent from all other types, having diverged an estimated 700,000 years ago. Because they are so genetically and behaviorally and morphologically distinct, distinct species status was recommended in 2010 by geneticist Phil Moran and co-authors. However, the West Coast transient population, the haplotype that lives here along the west coast of North America in BC, Washington, and Alaska, and Oregon, and California, is listed as threatened in BC, and two putative subpopulations exist, at least so far as we have identified, and each of them preferring different habitats. We've called them coastal and pelagic types of transients, or inner coast and outer coast. They will associate with each other, but their preference for different habitats is quite apparent. The inner coast subpopulation is almost always found east of the shelf break. They prey on marine mammals, primarily harbor seals, rather. They share some calls with outer coast transients, and the current population size is about 300 animals. And this includes only well-known transients that many of us have seen during whale watch trips or research excursions here in the Pacific Northwest. By comparison, the outer coast subpopulation will associate with inner coast transients. It's likely that they breed together. They are usually found, near, on, or west of the shelf break in much deeper water. They prey on marine mammals, but probably not many harbor seals, considering there's not many out there. I've seen them prey on a lot of Dall's porpoises, but they're also probably exploiting elephant seal populations and maybe even fur seal populations. They have some calls that are not shared with intercoast transients. And the current population size is unknown. We simply don't see these animals enough to have any idea how they're doing and how many there are out there. But we have photo identified over 200, and it's likely that there's several hundred more that have not yet been photo identified living along the shelf break or west of the shelf break in British Columbia and off the coast of the States as well. So what we call these animals are U's for unknown. Some of them have been identified in California, so they have CA designations. Some of them have T designations, and some of them are referred to as Alaskan transients because that's where they were first identified, as in Alaska. So it's really not quite clear exactly what we should call them until we have a better idea of how they fit into their own population and others. But that's what makes it so fascinating to learn more about these animals and to see how they differ from the ones we know so well that live here along the coast. So talking about group sizes, just following up on what Juliana discussed, you know, in the early 1970s or the mid 1970s, the average group size of transient killer whales was around 3.5, 4 individuals, and it's not that different now. It has risen a little bit, but basically what this shows is that even though the population has increased so much since then, that these animals really do rely on small group sizes to effectively hunt their prey. And however, the maximum group size has changed quite a bit. It seems that considering there is more prey around, that these animals will spend less time hunting and more time socializing in large groups. It's not uncommon to see more than 20 animals traveling together, and certain photo-identified encounters have shown, I think, a maximum of 38 individuals here in Johnson Strait traveling together at one time. So some pretty big groups. Just another take on one of the prey populations here. This is the estimated population trends for harbor seals here in British Columbia. And as you can see, after 1970, the harbor seal population really jumped. And right behind it, the inner coast subpopulation of bigs or transient killer whales also shot up. And this black line along the bottom is basically representative of the adults in the population. The dotted line on top is the total population numbers, but what it's referring to primarily is the offspring of the adults. So a very healthy population with a lot of calves and high survival rates for these offspring as well. So one of the things that we can do through photo identification is document the population over time and look at the parameters and the population trends. So we call any occurrence where a group of animals has been photo identified an encounter. And in 2012, we had 271 encounters, showing a total of 16 births within the population, 2 deaths. A small percentage of the population, 35 individuals, was not seen, of which 4 we're not sure if they were alive or dead. So the population size was around 260 individuals in 2012. In 2013, we had a whole lot more encounters. Again, 16 births, 3 deaths, small percentage of the population not seen, and a little bit of uncertainty around if certain animals were alive and dead, showing that the population had increased by about 5% within 1 year. And still putting together numbers for 2014 and 2015. But as you can see, you know, the number of births is still quite high, and I can tell you the number of deaths is still quite low. So this is a healthy and growing population, despite being one of the most highly toxic animals on the planet. They're reproducing and appear to be doing well, at least on the outside. We do know a fair bit about the distribution, thanks to the growing population and growing numbers of people out on the water with cameras. This is an encounter with the T100s in 2009, or at least 25 encounters with that group, showing that they spend a lot of time around southern Vancouver Island in the spring. As has been the case for the last 20 to 30 years, they go up to southeast Alaska in June and exploit harbor seals up there. They come back and do the same here in the late summer and early fall. And it appears they also go back to Southeast Alaska in the winter. And this isn't necessarily a migration of any kind, but rather just going to the best places for where they can exploit certain types of prey that are easily obtained at certain times of year. Just touching upon the other types of transient killer whales we have in BC, we have what are referred to as Alaskan transients, the Gulf of Alaska haplotype. And we also have the West Coast transient haplotype, which includes Californian animals, BC animals, and showing that the number of encounters we obtain each year is pretty small. Number of individuals total, 21, 20 individuals, 8. Sometimes in northern British Columbia, we see Alaskan transients, maybe up to 15 or 11 in total each year. And one year we even had Western Aleutian transients show up off west coast of Vancouver Island. So the total number of encounters by comparison with these other types is quite low. But we are learning about these other putative subpopulations and well-defined populations very slowly over time. This is a look at the total number of encounters showing population distribution of the inner coast and outer coast varieties of transients from 1958 to 2011. This is 3,582 encounters plotted on this chart here, showing the overall range of this type of animal. And I think with that, I'm just going to leave you with this fun little video of the T46Bs. So this is T46B2, a female here, and her younger sibling T46B4 playing with ancient murrelets in Cormorant Channel. Birds don't seem to be a very serious prey item for these animals, but when they are well fed, they will play with them and sometimes maybe consume them and definitely kill them in the process. Whether intentional or not, I'm not sure, but it is a fascinating part of their behavior. Anyway, happy to answer any questions, and thank you for listening.
Awesome, thank you, Jared. And I'm going to pose the first question to Giles, actually, because Jared was just talking about the transients hunting birds down. And Giles, have you ever seen residents doing the same thing? Hold on, I think you're on mute. Giles, can you unmute yourself? Uh-oh. She's still not there. Okay, well, maybe we'll go back to that one. And if all our presenters could come back so we can start the Q&A.
Sorry. Hey, Colleen, I can try to take a stab at it.
Right.
I don't know of any times that the residents have harassed or taken any birds, but I know that they do a similar type of behavior with the porpoises sometimes. And, Giles definitely has more to say about that, I think, but we'll wait for her to get unmuted to talk about that.
All right, and we can talk about the vessel questions as well now while we're hopefully dealing with these other technical issues. So we had a couple of questions come in about what the best times and locations were for going on whale watching trips, and also a related question because of the vessel disturbance that Juliana talked about. Would you suggest whale watching on a kayaking tour or something else, or does this still disturb the whales?
Yeah, so it used to be that you should go whale watching in the summer months, anytime May to September, and you could see southern resident killer whales. That's when they were. Oh, Giles is now. Yeah, great. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so, and but now with the southern residents, with their population decline and them not spending as much time in our local waters, you can't really rely on them being there in the summer months. And but the transients being around more often, there's not really a set, time that you could really go and for sure see the whales. But I would just suggest going when the weather is nice and just kind of roll the dice. But summer still seems to be a little bit better. But and then for kayaking, I mean both types of whale watching can have. If you go with a group that is respectful of the whales, it can be a really awesome trip. And kayaking can also be really great. Kayaks still have to stay with stay away waters, and they were included in those studies that found that vessel presence had negative impacts on the whales. So there's not really any for sure way to go see the whales on the water without disturbing them. But there are plenty of land-based whale watching opportunities. I know Limekiln is very popular to see the whales on the west side of San Juan Island, and there are also groups that kind of help you find out where the whales are at different times of the year. Whale Scout is one of them, and they kind of alert people to when there are opportunities to see whales that come into Puget Sound from the beach. So maybe we could come up with a list of resources for people that are interested.
Sure. Does anyone else want to comment on whale watching opportunities or recommendations for whale watching on a boat versus on land?
Well, I should just say that for the northern residents, it's a little different than the southern residents because they are really coming in July, August, September, October, and the whale watch boats up here run during those times, and the peak of activity is usually in August. And I would just suggest to anyone that they make sure that they go out with somebody who is a reputable captain or skipper of the boat, or a company that has got a good reputation for not disturbing the whales. A good operator can really do a lot of education and present the whales in a very responsible manner. But there's a spectrum out there, and you really need to do your homework as far as going out and figuring out which group. Of course, viewing from land is a really good option also. But it's not as convenient in the northern part of Vancouver Island as it is in the southern residents.
Yeah, it's pretty remote up there.
It is, and that's one reason why we've gotten involved in remote cameras in order to present what the whales are doing. And for the general public, and of course the internet is a great tool for that.
Yes, for everyone watching, last year Orca Lab had remote cameras set up that you could watch on explore.org and tune in and watch what the whales were doing live, which was really cool. When are you guys going to start that again this year?
It's up and running right now, and
But
we're waiting. We're waiting for the orcas, but we're the humpbacks are here, and that's a great success story for the coast, that the humpbacks have made recolonized areas of the coast that they once inhabited. And of course, they suffered greatly during right up until 1967, when there was still whaling. Canada was a whaling nation. And there was a concerted effort during that last year to really wipe out as many humpbacks as they could, and it took decades for the whales to come back. And they have now, and I think that we get returnees every year, so we get to see the same familiar humpbacks very often. And so if you go out on a whale watch in this part of the world, and you don't meet up with any orcas, there will be humpbacks to watch, and it's really quite exciting.
And if you can't make it to a watch in any part of the world, then you can tune in on explore.org and watch them that way, which is pretty neat too.
Exactly, and we have a camera at the rubbing beaches, and for the northern residents, the rubbing behavior is almost unique to them, and the southern residents don't do that. So I can put a plug in here for the northern residents, and you can watch the rubbing beaches through explore.org.
And that actually leads into a question that I had. I was going to ask if we ever saw those unique behaviors in other populations. We know now from what you just said that we don't really see southern residents do the rubbing behavior. Do we ever see northern residents do the kelping behavior that the southern residents do?
Yes.
Well, they enjoy kelp for sure.
They do, and they tug and they go through. I'm not quite sure. Jared, you could probably, you're out in the water.
They certainly play with kelp a lot of the time. And they like to tow it around, especially the juveniles will grab onto a frond, and it's like have little tug of wars and chase the whale with the kelp type games. So it's definitely a part of their environment that they incorporate into their daily lives.
We had an underwater camera at Craycroft Point, and we had this beautiful pass of some of the G's, and they went through the kelp forest, and you could just see the sensuousness of the feel that the kelp must give them. It's a lovely, soft, flowing, in the current kind of experience. So yeah, and I think Alexander Morton used to talk about kelp popping. They used to like popping the kelp, the end of the frond there with the bull kelp, and popping it and making a noise.
I like kelp popping too when I find it on the beach. Speaking of kelping, we had a question come in for Giles to identify the whale that was kelping. In the photo you shared, they asked specifically if it was J32, also known as, that was Rhapsody, I believe.
I can't answer that. I could, if you shoot me, whoever was asking, if you shoot me their email, I think I have that whole series, and after she turned back upright, so I could check into that. But off the top of my head, I don't remember. That was, gosh, probably 9 years ago. So I'm guessing no, because that, but I could check. I'd be happy to check.
Okay, we'll check back on that. And we also had a question on if there were any more southern residents thought to be pregnant at the moment, and if the parents of the dead calf recently found floating near BC, because I don't know how to pronounce that, I'm going to butcher it, if the parents had been identified yet.
No, we haven't gotten any genetics back from that female that was found floating near Souk. It was a female, which is makes it even that much more tragic, because we're lacking females in the population. A lot of the babies born, the majority of the babies born and who have at least survived have been male. We don't know the genetics yet, but J22 and then I think L72, certainly another L-pod animal, were both known to be pregnant, quite pregnant in September, as the drone, the folks that are doing the drone work up here told everybody, and those animals do not have calves and they're not pregnant anymore. So we're guessing that it was one of those two animals, sadly, the calf of one of those two animals. With regard to the question about the southern residents killing porpoise, I'm working on a joint collaboration with a number of people, Jared's folks at DFO, other folks up in Canada like Lance Barrett Leonard and Cascadia Research Collective, NOAA, and the Whale Museums has a fabulous very extensive database. So I've been querying those for the last couple of years. I became fascinated by this behavior in the southern residents in 2005 when it was seen quite a lot that year, where the southern residents kill porpoises. They tend to be young porpoises, neonates, like still with fetal folds, and they kind of just play with them to death. A bit like Jared was showing the video. I wish I had some underwater video of what the southern residents are doing with the porpoises, but they don't eat them. You can hardly even tell that there's any problem with from the outside. There's no bite marks and very few even rake marks on these animals. The number of them that we've been able to collect essentially shows them drowning or other trauma sort of to them. So some internal bleeding, but not at all like you would see, say a Biggs killer whale or the transients throwing their food around. When I describe it to people, I describe it as you're in a pool with your friends, and the object of the game is to keep a ball above water, but you can't use your hands. And so you kind of just push the ball up against your friend and maneuver your head around in order to keep this object above water. And you see a lot of that happening with the southern residents when they are in the process of playing to death a porpoise. So anyway, the paper, I'm still collecting information. I put out a call at the Salish Sea Ecosystem Conference to naturalists in the region to keep their eyes out and to please document the identity of the killer whale, killer whales involved, as well as the, if possible, it would be fabulous to get video, and so that we can see the species of porpoise that they're killing. Is it harbor porpoise or Dahl's porpoise? That's actually shifted over time. The concentration of animals of the species that the southern residents are killing. But mostly I'm super interested to know who the animals are. There seem to be some bad eggs in the group where there was an L-pod female who's no longer with us. She was implicated in a number of these phocenicides, as I'm calling them. So yeah, it's fascinating. I'm hoping that they're testing out a new food source, but I'm no way to know yet.
All right, and next question up is for anyone, but probably Juliana might be able to answer. With the recent concern about satellite tagging, since we lost an orca earlier this year who had dart fragments in his fin, how is suction cup tagging different from satellite tagging?
Yeah, so as you kind of alluded to, satellite tags have to have a dart that penetrates the skin, whereas suction cup tags don't penetrate the skin at all. They just kind of suck onto the skin, same way as like a suction cup toy sucks onto your bathtub. So they aren't expected to have a negative impact on the whales. The only potential is just the disturbance of us having to get close to them and put it on, but the whales that we tagged with the suction cup tags didn't really seem to be bothered by that. They generally would just do like a long dive or roll over once, but then return to the boat and the same behavior they were doing within a surfacing or two. So they're pretty different and just have to be kept, the two different types of tags. They're different types of tags, but the amount of information that you can collect from them and the type of information you can collect from them are very different as well. So the satellite are really useful for having long-term information collected, and we really do not know what the whales are doing when they're not in our local waters, and we know that they don't spend a lot of time in our local waters anymore, so we need to know where they go on the outer coast when they're not here, and the only way to do that really is with satellite tags. We've tried to ask people to report when they see them on the outer coast, but there's not as many people living out there. We've tried passive acoustic monitoring, and we're still improving that methodology as well to just kind of hear them as they pass different parts of the outer coast. But the satellite tag really gets a lot of detailed information for where they spend that time, and that can be valuable to maybe possibly extend critical habitat and protect these whales in other areas besides just the inland marine waters. Whereas the suction cup tags are short duration tags. The D tags can stay on whales for up to 24 hours, and then in the newer versions are maybe even longer. But we only had the tags stay on the whales during daylight hours, and so the average duration for our tags was only about 3 hours. So it's a lot of, and it collects a lot of information, the D tags do, but we have to collect that tag back and offload the data and get that data off the tag in order to analyze it, whereas the satellite tag, as the name suggests, that position information is transmitted to a satellite, and we can collect that information without actually collecting the tag back. So just very different types of methods for different types of questions.
Julia, can I just say for a moment, how many of the tagged whales have died?
Sorry, what was that?
How many of the tagged orcas have died?
I'm not sure. I'm not participating in those studies. I know that the most recent whale that died had some darts still in it, and they're researching to figure out why that was the case. It wasn't expected that the darts would stay in the fin of the whale, but I'll have to defer to NOAA's frequently asked questions, and when you research or go to their website, they have some information there, and I'll have to defer to that.
Yeah,
I can probably answer that as well, Paul. Yeah, I know
the
that
transients are tagged a lot more.
Yeah, I know that T99A disappeared shortly after being tagged. Whether or not it was related to her tag injuries, which were quite apparent, we don't know. There was an Alaskan transient that died several years after being tagged. There's been a few other transients that have died post-tagging, but it wasn't immediately after being tagged, so it's unsure whether or not the tag had anything to do with their death. But there's 4 animals that were tagged several years ago that are still carrying hardware around in their dorsal fins, T90, T86A to T75A, and can't remember the other one off the top of my head, but yeah, so there's a bit of a lasting impact there for some whales.
And some resident whales have also been tagged and show scarring. I think it should be noted that this is a very controversial subject, the satellite tagging, just because of the physical nature of what the actual tag does, and it's not universally accepted that this is a method that is really one that should be employed without great thought.
And at the moment, I know that NOAA has suspended their satellite tagging program to investigate a little bit more what's been happening before they start up again, kind of look into the death of the recent whale a little bit more.
Yes, and I think a shout out has to happen too about the increased number of observers along the coast contributing to sightings that and the efforts that are going into actually sort of tracking and pinpointing whales in an area. And it speaks to that there could be still more creative methods to finding out information. I totally agree. The information is critical. But what we know within ourselves, we actually, do we have to justify harsh methods, and I use that word not lightly, but do we have to use those methods to do something that we already know should happen? So anyway, that's just the way I feel about it.
I'd like to just say that's exactly where I am at this point. I really feel that the information that was gathered, has been gathered by the tagged southern resident killer whales is invaluable, and I'm glad to have it. The data that has been collected from satellite tagged animals corroborates long-term observations of these whales and where they go and habitat used. And I guess I'm at the point where I feel like we have enough data to make the decisions that we need to make with regard to critical habitat, expanding critical habitat to the outer coast. And so I'd like to see movement on that. I'm not really sure what more tag data is going to yield when we have had 8 southern residents tagged, and essentially the information is the same, tag after tag.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Giles. I do think, on balance, that the information that comes from tags has actually been useful, but it's largely corroborated what we already know from sightings. It adds layers, of course, you know, it adds layers like depths of dives and stuff like that. But you know, we do know a lot about what the habits of the orcas are, and the expanding observer network, I think, will really fill in a lot of the gaps in the future. I just feel that the risks involved in tagging and the injuries that occur subsequently are really an unfortunate risk to attach to a population that is certainly endangered.
And one of the main goals of Orca Month, just to shift the focus a little bit, is to increase awareness of the presence of orcas on the coastal waters of Washington and Oregon and California, and hopefully even increase those observer sightings a little bit more and continue to add to that data set. So we're going to shift to another question now, unless anyone has any last-minute thoughts about the satellite tagging. I appreciate everybody's input and hearing good thoughts on that very controversial issue.
Well, I just wanted to point out that it's important to have the evidence in order to change policy and change regulation. So, like Giles says, what's been collected has been extremely valuable, and hopefully that can be enough evidence. And you know, the whales. Actually, yeah, that's good enough. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Juliana. And one of the reasons the orcas do go down the outer coast of the U.S. is to catch salmon. So we had a question come in about how many salmon an adult orca needs to consume on a daily basis to meet nutritional needs. And I would echo the same question to Jared to see if we know that about transients and how much they need to eat to meet their nutritional needs.
I'm not 100% sure, Colleen. I think that you know, Volker Dieck did a study probably around 10 years ago. He was looking at energetics of transients, and I'm not sure how far he got with it, but I think what he basically came up with was that you know, 1 harbor seal per day per whale is kind of a good ballpark figure. And if you look at a harbor seal, you know, they weigh anywhere between the size of a pup, which is about the size of a small dog, to an adult being several hundred pounds. So it's a fair bit of hunting each day, but when the populations are high, you know, they probably have good success in doing this.
Great. And Giles, do you have the figure off the top of your head for how many salmon they need per day?
It's 100 to 300 pounds sort of thing, but it depends on the size of the animal and whether or not it's, say, a female that's pregnant or nursing. But we like to say 300 just to err on the upper end of that. So they need about I should know this figure right off the top of my head, a million fish a year or something like that. I mean, it's a tremendous amount of food for them. Paul, do you know any better than that?
No, I don't really think so. I think that, well, for example, the work that was done by John Durbin and Lance Barrett Leonard over the last couple of years using aerial photography with drones and looking at body condition suggested that in a year in which there was a low Chinook abundance, the body condition of the whales, or many of the whales, was poor. But in a year in which there was pretty good Chinook abundance, the body condition was pretty good. I think in the work that's been done with captive animals, there's a suggestion that maybe a large male might eat a couple of 100 pounds of fish a day, something rather like that. So if you translate that into the ocean and then say multiply it by, a 25-pound Chinook salmon in a poor year, you're talking about 10 dozen fish a day per individual. And if you translate that into a large group, I think you're really looking at a whole bunch of fish that the whales need. One of the things I always refer to is the catch that takes place from the sports fishery, which is primarily concentrated on Chinook salmon. And I just, kind of, I'm on the side of the whales, I guess, but I just think that there should be some regulatory pressure put on the sports fishery that further restricts, it's already restricted, but further restricts the number of Chinook salmon. I think there should be just a catch and release program for Chinooks, and that all of that abundance should be dedicated to the whales. I don't know if that'll happen because the sports fishery has a huge lobbying capability.
Colleen, I'm just looking at a paper here by John Ford a few years ago out of the Pacific Biological Station with co-authors, and in 2016 the northern and southern resident projected requirements for Chinook salmon at if they ate Chinook, 90% of their diet is about 2 million fish.
And is that for both populations?
It is. It's just under 2 million for both populations, and if they eat if 70% of their diet is Chinook, it's more like around 1.5 million fish.
Yeah, and so that seems about right. And then, but then always considering this population we're trying to grow, and so I think that's where we're thinking we'd like to ask for the 1 million just for the southern residents, but because we need more than the 83 critters that we already have. One thing that's fascinating about this so-called baby boom that we had down here with the southern residents, where we had at least 11 known calves that were born. So far, 8 of those are still living. Those whales were conceived. Most of those whales would have been conceived at a time when the southern residents were in the inland waters in their summer core critical habitat less than half the amount of time that they normally are. So that would have been late 2013 going into 2014. And there was relatively, I do the air quotes, high numbers of coastwide Chinook abundance late 2013 through 2015. And so it's pretty, I think, remarkable to see how tightly bound all those pregnancies where the females were able to get pregnant, remain pregnant, and birth either full-term healthy calves, or in the case of at least a couple of them, the calves were late term. That shows how important having high numbers of Chinook salmon throughout the range is. Dr. Sam Wasser has a paper coming out that is going to show that up to 60% of pregnancies are lost during pregnancy, so miscarriages. And out of those, 40% are late-term pregnancies, and that's pretty disturbing. So out of the animals that we're actually seeing that are living and making it, that's only 40% of the pregnancies that the southern residents are creating. So again, it just really comes down to the fish. They need more fish. We need to make more fish for the whales to find. And as Paul was suggesting, fisheries really needs to examine how fish are allocated. As it stands right now, so if you think of the total fish that are out there as a pie, and you divide that pie up into different segments with different earmarks on those sections, there is no slice of the pie that's set aside for the southern residents or for any marine mammal that requires that relies on Chinook. And that's just bizarre to me, that a population of animals that is, we know what they eat, we know what they need, and yet we don't set aside a portion of that, the total amount that fisheries managers thinks are out there. That needs to change, and then possibly cutting into the pie in other ways, and quite honestly allowing more fish to escapement, meaning those fish that escape being killed in some other way so that they can make it back to their natal spawning grounds. Because again, it's wild salmon are in desperate straits at this point, and we humans really need to do something. We need to make some hard choices for the next couple of probably decades, honestly, but we need to make some hard choices if we want to recover salmon throughout the entire southern residence range and northern residence range, for the fish themselves and for these whales that are reliant on them.
I think that's great. I just wanted to say a small encouraging note, and that is that the U.S. took down the Elwha Dam, which is a huge undertaking, and I think for those who don't know, it's a dam in Washington State that blocked a river and essentially prevented the normal transition of fish from the ocean to the rivers and back again. And that there's now a proposal to take down dams in the Snake River, another big river in that Puget Sound system. And I gather that there's a lot of encouragement from governments about this actually happening. So there are real efforts being made to restore salmon habitat. I see you shaking your head, Giles, but to me that's an encouraging sign. I just would like them to move on to some of the other issues like allocation of the Chinook fishery, as I really think the orcas deserve a very large slice of that pie.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of support from the government side of taking the Snake River dams down quite yet. We're working on it. But the Klamath River, on the other hand, the 4 dams there are officially slated to come down by 2020, which is an issue we've been working on for about a year and a half, which is great as long as it actually goes forward. We're still keeping an eye on it. But Giles and I can probably go on for a while about the Snake River dams. We might have to leave that for another webinar. But we do have one last question. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out for a little bit past our scheduled end time. This is our last one so far. It says, the recent videos of Morgan beaching herself on a platform on Laurel Parque SeaWorld came out with a statement saying that it is normal for an orca to beach itself for up to 30 minutes at a time. Do orcas in the wild ever purposefully beach?
Really?
Well, yes, I think the evidence is that in Patagonia, for example, the orcas beach themselves in order to catch little elephant seals.
I don't think for
And sea
30
lions,
minutes at a
but
time.
I don't know if any of them have ever been out of the water for that period of time. Certainly in our area, we see orcas, coming into very shallow water with the rubbing beaches, for example, but they don't beach themselves. I don't think it's a normal kind of behavior. SeaWorld trains its orcas to beach themselves. They train them to slide out and display their bodies. It's actually not. It's a trained behavior, not a normal behavior. So I'm not sure I buy the argument that what Morgan did on that occasion was just normal.
It's not the only time, too. I mean, Gudrun did it, and she died. And she just slammed herself into the concrete, and died as a result of the trauma.
Very difficult to classify any behavior that occurs in captivity as normal.
That is true, and captivity is probably a subject for a third webinar, which maybe we'll schedule at another point in time if everything went well with this one. So thank you everyone who tuned in and submitted questions, and thank you so much to all of our speakers and our panel of experts. Sorry I kept you past your dinner time, but I'll let you all go now. And thanks again everyone for joining.
Colleen.
Thank you, Colleen.
Take care. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye, Jerry.